Why German soldiers whispered cursed snakes whenever the FEB appeared on their front. The document is dated January 9, 1945. It is a patrol debriefing report typed in German on a single sheet of Wehrmacht standard issue paper, filed by an intelligence officer of the 232nd Infantry Division at a command post located approximately 4 kilometers north of Monte Castelo in the province of Bologna. The report describes a night patrol engagement that occurred in the early hours of January 7th in a drainage draw on the southeastern slope of the mountain at an elevation of approximately 780 meters. The patrol, 8 men, led by an unteroffizier, had been tasked with a standard reconnaissance mission: identify Brazilian forward positions, assess patrol activity, return with prisoners if possible. They were experienced soldiers. Several had served on the Eastern Front. They moved out at 23 hours in near total darkness, using a route that had been used without incident on at least 3 previous occasions. They did not return. 2 men made it back to the German line at approximately 02:30 hours. Both were wounded. One had a bayonet wound to the left forearm. The other had been struck by a rifle butt hard enough to fracture his left orbital socket. Neither man could provide a coherent account of what had happened in the drainage draw. What they could say, and what the intelligence officer records with the particular careful neutrality of a man writing something he does not fully understand, is that the Brazilians had been waiting for them, not in a position that the patrol's pre-mission reconnaissance had identified, not on a route that made tactical sense by standard doctrine. They had been waiting in the dark, in silence, in exactly the right place, as though they had known. The intelligence officer adds a handwritten note in the margin of the typed report. It is 3 words in German. Translated literally, they read, "The cursed snakes." It is not the first time that phrase appears in the 232nd Division's records. It will not be the last. To understand why German soldiers in the northern Apennines developed a specific documented fear of the Brazilians on their front, it is necessary to understand the strategic situation that placed these 2 forces in contact, and the particular conditions under which that contact occurred. By November 1944, the Italian campaign has entered its most grinding phase. The Allied advance that began with the landings in Sicily in July 1943 has slowed to a pace measured not in kilometers per day, but in meters per week. The Gothic Line, the German defensive belt running 320 kilometers across the spine of the Italian peninsula, has absorbed 2 major Allied offensives without breaking. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring has demonstrated a consistent ability to conduct fighting withdrawals that preserve his formations while inflicting disproportionate casualties on attacking forces. The northern Apennines are not sheer and dramatic mountains. They are something more insidious, a continuous series of ridgelines and draws, each one offering a prepared defender multiple firing positions and multiple withdrawal routes, each one requiring an attacker to expose himself on open ground to reach the next. The American Fifth Army holds a sector of the Gothic Line running north from Florence toward Bologna. Highway 64, the only road capable of supporting military traffic in this section, is dominated at every critical point by German-held high ground. Monte Castelo is the most important of these terrain features, and the entire front is a system of interlocking observation posts and fire support positions, each one designed to make the cost of any advance prohibitive. Into this system, in the late summer of 1944, the FEB is inserted. The Brazilian division arrives with significant disadvantages its German enemies will rapidly assess. It has no prior combat experience as a formation. Its winter clothing arrives late and in insufficient quantities for mountain operations above 800 meters. What the German assessment does not adequately account for is the specific quality of the men filling those American uniforms. The Brazilian enlisted soldier of 1944 is shaped by conditions that have no European equivalent. He comes largely from the rural interior of a continental country where the skills associated with backcountry survival, tracking, patience, moving quietly through dense vegetation, remaining motionless for extended periods, are not trained behaviors but inherited ones. The Cerrado of Minas Gerais, the Caatinga of the Northeast, the dense Atlantic forest of the coastal states. These landscapes produce men who are, by the specific standards of infantry patrolling, extraordinarily well prepared without knowing they are prepared at all. The Germans on Monte Castelo begin to understand this in November 1944, when the FEB's 3rd Battalion of the 11th Infantry Regiment immediately begins patrol activity at a tempo and tactical aggression that the previous American unit had not maintained. The first German patrol report noting Brazilian behavior is dated November 3, 1944. It observes that the new unit conducts aggressive forward patrolling at irregular intervals, using routes and timings that do not conform to predictable patterns. Unpredictability, in the mathematics of defensive warfare, is among the most dangerous qualities an opposing force can possess. By December 1944, the German defenders have revised their assessment in ways the early evaluations did not anticipate. The 3 Brazilian assaults on Monte Castelo have failed. That is the operational reality. But the manner in which the Brazilians have fought between the assaults, in the darkness and cold of the Apennine winter, has produced something in the German defensive calculation that no amount of successful resistance can entirely dispel. It has produced uncertainty. One captured German Gefreiter, interrogated by 5th Army intelligence officers on December 18, 1944, describes the Brazilians in terms the American transcribing officer finds sufficiently unusual to underline. They do not fight, the prisoner says, the way soldiers fight. They fight the way hunters hunt. The forward line of the FEB's sector in December 1944 is a series of outposts, squad-sized positions of 4 to 6 men, occupying stone farmhouses or shallow scrapes in the shale at elevations between 700 and 950 meters. In some sectors, the distance to the nearest German positions is 400 meters of open slope. In others, particularly in the draws and gullies, it is less than 80 meters. In at least 2 documented locations, soldiers on both sides can hear, on quiet nights, the sounds of the other side's cooking fires, and the occasional cough of a man with the respiratory infections the damp cold produces reliably in everyone. This proximity is a tactical choice. Squad leaders and platoon commanders have learned that the German defensive system is optimized for long-range fire, and that the closer a Brazilian position is to the German line, the less effectively German artillery can engage it without risk to its own forward troops. Getting close to the enemy is safer than staying far away. It is the kind of knowledge acquired only through experience, through the specific, costly process of learning what kills you and adjusting behavior accordingly. By December 1944, the FEB's 11th Infantry Regiment has developed an informal cadre of soldiers who specialize in night patrolling with a degree of proficiency that has no basis in the Brazilian Army's pre-war training manuals. They are infantrymen, privates and corporals, who have demonstrated a specific aptitude for moving through difficult terrain at night and remaining absolutely still for extended periods while German patrols pass within meters of their concealed positions. Several come from backgrounds that have directly prepared them. A corporal from the rubber-tapping communities of the Amazon has spent his working life moving silently through dense vegetation before dawn. A private from the Pantanal of Mato Grosso grew up hunting caiman at night from small boats. A sergeant from São Paulo's coffee-growing region worked as a rural night watchman for 7 years before conscription, capable of remaining motionless in a concealed position for periods exceeding 4 hours without losing alertness. None have formal sniper training. None carry designated sniper weapons. What they have, instead of specialized equipment, is specialized perception, the ability to identify, in a landscape that presents itself to the untrained eye as undifferentiated darkness, the specific irregularities that indicate human presence. A shape that does not move the way vegetation moves in wind. A sound that occurs at an interval too regular to be natural. The faint smell of ersatz coffee drifting from a position no map marks as occupied. By late November 1944, Brazilian patrol leaders have been watching the German signal system from concealed positions for 3 weeks. They have not broken the German communication code, but they have mapped its rhythm. They know, within approximately 4 minutes, when forward positions will be occupied by crews at the beginning of their rotation, men who are alert, and when they will be occupied by crews at the end, men who are cold, fatigued, whose attention has narrowed to the comfort of the relief that is coming. This 4-minute window becomes the preferred moment for close approach reconnaissance. It is during these windows that patrol leaders push forward to distances daylight observation would identify as suicidal. On at least 6 documented occasions between November 1944 and January 1945, they take prisoners. A typical operation involves a 4-man element: 1 man to subdue the target, 2 for immediate security, 1 to manage the withdrawal route. The approach uses routes identified through previous reconnaissance. The seizure itself takes less than 30 seconds. All 6 German soldiers are taken at night. All 6 without a shot being fired. All 6 upon interrogation express the same bewilderment. They did not hear the Brazilians coming. The cursed snakes do not announce themselves. They are simply suddenly there. The shoulder patch of the Brazilian Expeditionary Force depicts a cobra fumante, a smoking snake. The image derives from Brazilian popular sarcasm. It would sooner snow in the Amazon than Brazil send soldiers to fight in Europe. A smoking snake, something impossible in nature, became the shorthand for the entire enterprise. The FEB's soldiers adopted the image deliberately, converting contempt directed at them into identity. By the time the first elements arrive in Naples in July 1944, the Cobra Fumante is not an embarrassment. It is a declaration. What the German soldiers begin calling the Brazilians in the winter of 1944 is a translation of that same image into a different register entirely. The German term that appears in the documents, variously rendered as verfluchte Schlangen or die Schlangen, does not carry the ironic self-deprecation of the Brazilian original. It carries fear. The snake, in the cultural vocabulary of the German soldiers writing these reports, is an animal that moves without sound, that appears without warning, that strikes before it is seen. This shift marks the precise point at which the FEB's identity changes, in German eyes on German paper, from an unknown quantity to a known threat. The first incident in the German documentary record occurs on the night of November 11, 1944. A German 2-man observation post at approximately 830 meters elevation is found empty during the morning relief. Both men are missing. No shots have been fired, no alarm raised. The field telephone line is intact. Their equipment, rifles, ammunition, personal kit, is stacked neatly against the wall as though they stepped away and intended to return. They appear 3 days later in a 5th Army prisoner of war facility near Florence, delivered by a 4-man patrol that filed its after-action report with bureaucratic brevity. Target acquired, no shots fired, 2 prisoners delivered to battalion intelligence. The German intelligence officer's reconstruction of how the post was approached and neutralized without triggering its trip flare, telephone check-in protocol, or visual signal system fails completely. His report concludes, with candor unusual in military documents, that the method used by the opposing patrol remains unknown. A second post disappears 3 weeks later under nearly identical circumstances. A third, in January, is not taken, but is found to have been observed at close range. A set of boot prints in the frost, within 4 meters of the position's rear wall, leading downhill in a direction the position's field of fire did not cover. Whoever made the prints had stood there, close enough to hear the occupants breathing, and left without being detected. A Feldwebel in the 2nd Company writes in his personal diary in January 1945, a diary captured with the unit's field records when the German line breaks, that the men on his section of the line have stopped talking during the night hours at the forward posts, not because they have been ordered to, because they are afraid that if they make noise, the Brazilians will find them. The cobra fumante in German becomes die verfluchten Schlangen, the cursed snakes. The name spreads laterally along the German line, carried by soldiers rotating out of forward positions, passed over food and ersatz coffee, attached to stories that grow in the telling but retain, at their core, a factual residue that no embellishment can entirely obscure. To understand why the FEB's night patrol operations were so consistently effective, it is necessary to examine what made Brazilian patrolling different from what the German defenders had encountered on other fronts. The first element is terrain reading. The fundamental problem of night movement in mountains is that darkness removes visual information while amplifying sound and making its direction harder to identify. A man moving through rocky terrain at night must manage his footing without seeing his feet, manage his breathing without gauging how far sound carries in cold air, and maintain awareness of a threat that may be stationary and watching from a position he cannot identify. The Brazilian soldiers who become most effective at this are not effective because of formal training. They are effective because training finds in them a pre-existing aptitude it can refine, but did not create. A man who has spent his working life navigating the Cerrado before dawn or tracking animals through scrub woodland has developed a neuromuscular calibration for movement in darkness that formal training cannot replicate in the time available. He places his feet differently, testing ground before committing weight, sensing through the soul the difference between solid rock and frost-heaved ground that will crack underfoot. He breathes differently, slower, shallower, through the nose, managing the visible exhalation that cold air produces and that a watching sentry could detect at close range. The second element is patience. Ground temperatures at elevations above 700 meters in December and January routinely fall below -5 degrees Celsius. A man lying prone on frozen shale loses body heat at a rate producing genuine physiological risk after 90 minutes without movement. The standard military response is to limit static observation periods and rotate personnel. The FEB's most effective patrol leaders extend static periods to 3 or 4 hours within audible range of German forward posts, managing the cold through controlled isometric muscle contractions that generate internal heat without visible movement, and the specific mental discipline of focusing attention outward, on the sounds of the slope, the rhythm of the signal lights, rather than on the growing pain of frozen extremities. The trip flares protecting German positions are calibrated for a man walking or crawling at normal patrol speed. They are not calibrated for a man who covers the last 30 meters over 40 minutes, moving only during the intervals between sentry checks, spending more time motionless than moving. The third element is the use of sound as both a navigational tool and a tactical weapon. A whispered conversation at 40 meters is audible to a trained listener in still air. The metallic click of a rifle safety is audible at 25 meters. The sound of a man's breathing changing rhythm, from the slow regularity of alertness to the faster pattern of anxiety, is detectable at 10 meters to someone who has been listening in silence long enough to establish a baseline. Brazilian patrol leaders spend 30 minutes or more in static listening positions before approaching a German post, mapping its sound environment. They identify sentry positions by breathing and movement. They locate tripwires by the faint metallic tremor these devices produce when the wind moves across the slope. They learn, within their first 2 weeks in the sector, that a German star shell destroys the sentry's night vision for 30 to 45 seconds after its descent, and they begin timing their approach movements to coincide with the post-flare darkness window, using the Germans' own illumination system as cover for their advance. The fourth element is human. The German soldiers on Monte Castelo are, by December 1944, tired in the structural sense of a force fighting continuously since 1939. Its veterans thinned by attrition, its replacements increasingly drawn from age groups the early war Wehrmacht would not have considered for frontline service. Against these men, the FEB deploys soldiers fresh to the theater, motivated by the intensity of men fighting their first war, possessed of physical and perceptual capabilities that 5 years of European warfare have not taught the Germans to defend against. Experience teaches you to defend against threats you have encountered before. The specific combination the FEB brings, the terrain reading, the patience, the acoustic discipline, is not a threat the defenders on Monte Castelo have encountered before. They learn to fear it. They name it. They write about it in patrol reports and personal diaries and prisoner interrogation transcripts. But they do not learn to stop it. The night of January 22, 1945 is overcast and moonless. Cloud cover sits at approximately 600 meters, eliminating the ambient starlight that on clear nights gives a man with adjusted eyes enough illumination to distinguish a figure at 30 meters. On this night, the darkness on the northeastern slope is as close to absolute as mountain terrain produces, the kind in which a man 10 meters away is invisible, in which direction is determined by slope angle and wind and memory rather than by vision. At 22:30 hours, a 6-man patrol from the 1st Platoon, Able Company, 3rd Battalion of the FEB's 11th Infantry Regiment departs its forward position at approximately 780 meters elevation. The patrol leader is Corporal Adalberto Caires, 24 years old, from the municipality of Lençóis in the Chapada Diamantina region of Bahia, a landscape of sandstone escarpments and dense cerrado that has produced in him exactly the qualities the Apennine night rewards. He has conducted 11 previous patrols in this sector. He knows the ground between his forward position and the German line at 850 meters, the way a man knows a room he has crossed in darkness many times, not by seeing it, but by having internalized its dimensions, its obstacles, its specific textures underfoot. The patrol's objective tonight is not a prisoner. It is something more specific and more consequential. In the 3 weeks preceding January 22nd, Brazilian patrol leaders have identified, through acoustic reconnaissance, the location of a German forward artillery observation post, a position from which a Wehrmacht artillery Beobachter has been directing 105mm fire onto the FEB's forward positions and, more critically, onto the supply route along which the battalion's food, ammunition, and medical supplies move each night. The position is a natural feature, a limestone outcropping at approximately 870 meters elevation, on the military crest of a secondary ridgeline. From it, the observer has line of sight to approximately 3.4 kilometers of the Brazilian supply route. Since January 3rd, this observer has directed fire destroying 2 mule loads of 81mm mortar ammunition, damaging a field telephone relay station, and killing 1 Brazilian soldier, a mule handler named Evaristo Campos, 20 years old, from Pernambuco, on January 17th. 2 requests for air support have been denied. 3 counter-battery fire missions have failed to destroy the position, which is protected on 3 sides by the natural geometry of the limestone outcropping and requires either a direct hit from above or a ground approach to neutralize effectively. The ground approach is what Corporal Caires has been planning for 19 days. The approach route covers approximately 340 meters of vertical gain across 3 distinct terrain features: a drainage gully running northeast for the first 120 meters, a band of dense scrub vegetation at approximately 820 meters that provides concealment but requires slow movement, and a final 80-meter stretch of open shale below the outcropping that offers no natural cover and must be crossed entirely on the basis of timing and darkness. Caires has spent the preceding 4 nights advancing incrementally along this route, never the full distance, always stopping at a predetermined point, observing, then withdrawing. On the 4th night, January 21st, he spends 90 minutes in a static listening position at the vegetation edge, mapping the acoustic environment of the outcropping above him. What he has determined, the German observer occupies the position from approximately 20 sails to 02 hours, accompanied by a single radio operator. The observer uses a Schlangen, a scissor periscope mounted on a fixed tripod, which produces a faint metallic sound when its elevation adjustment is operated. The radio operator transmits at approximately 40-minute intervals, each transmission lasting between 90 seconds and 3 minutes. The single-trip flare protecting the position covers the southern approach. The northern approach, across the open shale, is not covered by any alert device, because it faces uphill toward the German main line, and the position's designers have not anticipated a threat from that direction. The patrol crosses the line of departure at 22:30 hours and moves in single file, Cares leading. The first 120 meters of drainage gully take approximately 35 minutes. Movement calibrated precisely to the acoustic threshold of the terrain. The 40-meter band of scrub vegetation takes 22 minutes, all 6 men synchronizing their movement to occur during the intervals between the wind's contact with the vegetation, using the ambient sound of the scrub itself as acoustic cover. At the edge of the open shale, Cares stops the patrol. He calculates the next radio transmission will begin in approximately 2 minutes. He distributes the patrol. 4 men remain at the vegetation edge, providing security and a withdrawal anchor. Caires and Private Joaquim Santana, 21, from the Vale do Jequitinhonha in Minas Gerais, the patrol's best mover on open ground, will cross the shale during the transmission window when the radio operator's attention is on his equipment and the ambient sound of the transmission itself provides partial acoustic cover. The radio begins transmitting at 23:47 hours. Caires and Santana rise from the vegetation edge and move across the open shale. They cover 80 meters in approximately 50 seconds, not running but moving at the fastest pace that silent movement on frozen shale permits, feet testing and committing in a rhythm that 19 days of preparation have made automatic. They reach the base of the northern face of the limestone outcropping at 23:48 hours, pressing flat against the rock as the radio transmission ends. Above them, separated by approximately 4 meters of vertical limestone, are 2 German soldiers who do not know they are there. Between them, Caires and Santana carry something not on any official supply manifest, a length of braided rope, approximately 6 meters, acquired from a mule handler's kit. Caires hands one end to Santana and loops the other around his own left wrist. He begins to climb the northern face, not a technical climb, but a careful, soundless negotiation of 4 meters of limestone using handholds identified from below during reconnaissance, pressing his body against the rock to distribute weight across as many contact points as possible. He reaches the top at 23:51 hours. The German observer is 3 meters away, facing south, the Schlangen mounted on its tripod before him. The radio operator is to the observer's left, back to the northern face, attention on the radio set in his lap. Neither man is looking north. Caires pulls the rope. Santana begins to climb. What happens in the next 40 seconds is recorded in Caires' after-action report in language unusually sparse by military standards, a quality the battalion intelligence officer attributes not to evasiveness, but to the specific economy of a man for whom the events described were simply work, conducted to a plan, completed as intended. The observer's Schlangen is destroyed. The radio set is destroyed. Both German soldiers are taken alive, disarmed, bound, and moved to the northern face of the outcropping within 40 seconds of Caires reaching the top. The German artillery position that has been directing fire on the Brazilian supply route since January 3rd ceases to function at 23:51 hours on January 22, 1945. No shots are fired. The patrol returns at 02:17 hours with 2 prisoners, one captured Schlangen elevation adjustment mechanism, removed as proof of the position's neutralization, and the radio operator's transmission log. The after-action report is 4 paragraphs long. It does not use the word heroism. It does not use the word extraordinary. It describes the patrol in the same register it would use to describe a successful resupply run. Corporal Adalberto Caires receives no individual commendation. The German artillery fire on the Brazilian supply route stops. You are watching a story that exists in no English-language history book. If this channel's work matters to you, recovering the operations, the names, the specific details that the official record buried, consider subscribing. There are more patrols, more nights, more men the record forgot to name. The capture of the German artillery observer on January 22nd is not an isolated event. It is the most operationally significant action in a sequence building since November 1944, and its consequences extend well beyond the immediate cessation of artillery fire. The transmission log recovered from the radio operator contains 6 weeks of fire mission records. The specific coordinates, times, and ammunition expenditures of every artillery strike the observer has directed since early December. Working with a captured German codebook obtained from an earlier prisoner-taking operation, the battalion intelligence officer spends 3 days translating and cross-referencing this log against the FEB's own damage records. The result gives the Brazilian command, for the first time, a precise picture of how the German artillery system on Monte Castelo has been operating, which observation posts feed which batteries, which routes are under consistent observation, and most critically, which sections of the German defensive line are dependent on observed fire for their integrity. This intelligence reaches General Mascarenhas de Moraes' headquarters on January 26, 1945, as planning for the 4th assault on Monte Castelo is already underway. It changes the assault plan in ways that will prove decisive. It identifies a 200-meter section of the German main line on the northeastern face, the same face that defeated 3 previous assaults, as dependent on the now neutralized observation post. Without the observer, this section cannot call effective fire on the approach routes below it. Without effective fire on approach routes, the MG-42 positions covering those routes become, for the first time, the primary defensive system rather than a secondary one. Lethal, but approachable with the methodical patience the FEB's patrol cadre has been developing since October. The assault planning incorporates this intelligence directly. The 105mm howitzer preparation is concentrated on the northeastern face. The assault companies are assigned approach routes. The captured log confirms are not under observation from any surviving German post. The 80mm mortar section is repositioned using position data derived from close approach reconnaissance rather than aerial photography estimates. But the intelligence does something less tangible and more important. It tells the Brazilian command, for the first time, that the German defensive system on Monte Castelo is not the seamless whole that 3 failed assaults have made it appear. It has gaps. It has dependencies. The mountain that has defeated the FEB 3 times is not invulnerable. It is a system, and systems have points of failure. On the German side, the 232nd Infantry Division's war diary for January 3rd to February 20th records a progressive deterioration in the forward security situation. The loss of the artillery observation post is noted as a significant tactical setback. The ongoing Brazilian patrol activity has produced a measurable degradation in the forward unit's alertness that no amount of officer supervision can fully correct. Men who are afraid of the dark perform poorly in the dark. This is not a moral judgment. It is physiological. Fear increases the metabolic rate, disrupts fine motor control, narrows attention, and reduces the capacity for sustained low-intensity vigilance that defensive patrolling requires. By February 20th, the German forward positions on the northeastern face are manned by soldiers conducting sentry rotations in silence, firing star shells at irregular intervals, not because they have observed movement, but because the darkness itself has become intolerable, and in at least 3 documented cases, reporting contact with Brazilian patrols that subsequent investigation suggests did not occur. The mountain that the FEB could not take in November is, by February, defended by soldiers who are already, in a meaningful psychological sense, partially defeated. At 05:45 hours on February 21, 1945, the 105mm howitzers of the 1st Artillery Group opened fire. The 4th assault has begun. Monte Castelo falls at 10:40 hours on February 21, 1945. The assault proceeds with a directness the three preceding attempts did not achieve. The adjusted artillery preparation, concentrated on the northeastern face, guided by coordinates from the captured transmission log, suppresses German forward positions with a precision the previous preparations could not replicate. The assault companies advance along routes 11 weeks of night patrolling have mapped in granular detail. The MG-42 positions that stopped the November and December assaults are engaged with mortar fire placed using ground-level reconnaissance data rather than aerial photography estimates. The German resistance is real. 11 killed and 34 wounded in the final push from the point the MG-42 positions go silent to the moment the flag is raised. The 292nd Division's forward units fight with the competence 5 years of war have produced even in depleted formations. They do not simply collapse, but they do not hold. The specific 200-meter section of the northeastern face identified in the captured transmission log as artillery-dependent is the first to break. Without observed artillery support, its defenders are reduced to organic infantry weapons, firing pre-registered but unobserved fire. Insufficient against a Brazilian assault, moving along routes the defenders have not been able to pre-register, supported by mortars with accuracy derived from 11 weeks of ground-level reconnaissance. At 10:40 hours, Sergeant Olivio Gondim of Baker Company raises the Brazilian national flag over the summit. Not a theatrical gesture, a signal to American artillery observers on adjacent high ground that fires should shift to the German withdrawal routes north of the mountain. In the German command post of the 232nd Infantry Division, the loss of Monte Castelo is recorded in the war diary in 2 sentences. The first notes the time of the Brazilian assault. The second notes the time the summit was lost. There is no analysis, no attribution of cause, no attempt to reconstruct how a position that held against 3 assaults failed on the 4th. There is only the record of what happened and the time at which it happened. The cursed snakes are on the summit. The mountain is taken. Corporal Adalberto Caires returns to Brazil in the summer of 1945. He disembarks at Rio de Janeiro with the rest of the 3rd Battalion, walks down the gangplank in his American uniform, and is absorbed into the crowd of 25,134 men who are, for approximately 6 weeks, the most celebrated soldiers in Brazilian history. He attends no ceremony in his honor. He receives no individual commendation for the January 22nd operation. His after-action report, 4 paragraphs, filed the morning after the patrol, is processed by the battalion intelligence officer, forwarded to regimental headquarters, and filed. It is not lost. It is simply never read again in a context that would connect it to a name. The broader story of the FEB's patrol operations, the 11 weeks of night work that systematically dismantled the German defensive intelligence system on Monte Castelo, that produced the intelligence used in the February assault plan, that created in the German defenders a specific and documented fear their own records name explicitly, does not appear in the post-war historical literature in any language in a form that does justice to what it actually was. The political displacement of the Vargas government removes institutional support for FEB commemoration within months of the veterans' return. The Brazilian Army's failure to systematically preserve and analyze its Italian campaign records means the operational lessons of the patrol program are never extracted and transmitted. There is no Brazilian equivalent to the American or British official history programs, no professional historian tasked, in the immediate post-war years, with reading the FEB's patrol logs and connecting individual actions to strategic outcomes. The German side of the record suffers a different fate. The 292nd Infantry Division's field records, the patrol reports documenting the specific incidents that generated the verfluchten Schlangen designation, the war diary recording the progressive deterioration of forward security, the Feldwebel's personal diary, are captured by Allied forces in March 1945 and transferred to American custody. They pass through the standard processing pipeline for captured enemy documents, are evaluated for immediate intelligence value, and are archived, in German, in a facility in the United States, where they remain, largely unexamined by researchers with the specific combination of German language skills and FEB operational knowledge necessary to connect them to the Brazilian record on the other side of the line. The connection is not made until 2003, when Brazilian military historian Denison de Oliveira obtains access to the captured 232nd Division records through the National Archives in Washington. What he finds in those documents, the specific patrol reports, the interrogation transcripts, the marginal notes and diary entries, confirms and in several cases exceeds what the Brazilian operational record suggests about the scope and effectiveness of the FEB's night patrol program. The phrase verfluchten Schlangen appears in the German documents on 14 separate occasions across November 1944 to February 1945. In formal patrol reports, in informal unit communications, in a company commander's memorandum requesting additional trip flare stocks, and in the personal diary of the Feldwebel who wrote about his men's nighttime silence. It is not a single soldier's coinage. It is a designation that spread through the 232nd Division's forward units organically, the way language always spreads when it captures something existing vocabulary cannot adequately describe. De Oliveira publishes his findings in Portuguese in 2005. The book is not translated into English, German, or Italian. The specific connection between the FEB's night patrol program and the intelligence that shaped the February 21st assault plan, the causal chain running from Corporal Queiroz' 19 nights of reconnaissance to the captured transmission log to the adjusted artillery preparation to the fall of Monte Castelo, does not appear in any English-language account of the Italian campaign. Corporal Adalberto Queiroz returns to the Chapada Diamantina after his discharge. He works as a guide for travelers exploring the region's cave systems and sandstone escarpments, the same landscape that shaped the perceptual capacities he carried to the Apennines. He dies in 1978 in the municipality of Lençóis. His service record, preserved in the military archive in Rio de Janeiro, does not note the January 22nd patrol. It does not note the captured Scherenfern roar, the transmission log, the 19 nights of reconnaissance, or the 40 seconds on top of a limestone outcropping at 870 meters elevation in which he and one other man neutralized a position that 3 artillery missions had failed to destroy. It notes his name, his rank, and the date he was discharged. Corporal Adalberto Queiroz, discharged, August 1945. The mountain remembers nothing. Mountains never do. But the documents exist in Rio de Janeiro, in Washington, in the specific folder in the 232nd Division's captured records, where the patrol reports accumulate through November, December, January, and into February, each one adding another instance of the phrase the German soldiers coined for the men on the other side of the line. Die verfluchten Schlangen. 14 times in German military documents, the cursed snakes are named. Not once, in any of those 14 instances, does a German soldier riding in the cold of the Apennine winter know the name of the man who taught him to be afraid of the dark. The German soldiers on Monte Castelo had a name for them before the historians did. That is the detail that stays. Not the battle itself, not the flag raised at 10:40 hours on February 21st, not the operational summary filed at 5th Army headquarters that afternoon. What stays is the image of men in forward positions on a frozen mountain, writing in patrol reports and personal diaries and unit memoranda, reaching for language adequate to describe something they had encountered and could not categorize by any existing term in their military vocabulary, and finding, in the end, a name drawn not from doctrine but from instinct, not soldiers, not the opposing force, not the Brazilians, the cursed snakes. There is something in that name the official record, on either side, never managed to capture. It carries the specific weight of fear that has been earned rather than assumed. Fear produced not by a single dramatic engagement, but by 11 weeks of incremental, patient, methodical work conducted in darkness by men whose names the formal record did not preserve. Corporals and privates from the Cerrado and the Caatinga and the rubber-tapping rivers of the Amazon, carrying American rifles and 19 days of reconnaissance in their heads, moving across frozen shale at a pace calibrated to the acoustic threshold of the terrain, doing work that no military manual had taught them and that no commendation board would formally recognize. They were not supposed to be there. Their country was not supposed to send them. The snake on their shoulder patch was the symbol of an impossibility that became, in the mountains of northern Italy, in the winter of 1944 and 1945, something that German soldiers wrote about in the margins of official documents because the main text had no category for it. This channel exists to find those margins, to read the handwritten notes the typed reports could not contain, to follow the 14 instances of a German phrase across the captured records of a division that feared the men it was supposed to be holding back, and to connect that phrase to the specific human beings who earned it, patrol by patrol, night by night, 40 seconds at a time on top of a limestone outcropping that no one outside a small valley in Bahia has ever heard of. If that work matters to you, subscribe. Share this with someone who has never heard of the FEB. Leave a comment with the name of a forgotten soldier you think deserves a video. The cursed snakes are still out there in the archives. We are still looking for them.